Hey there, friends, and welcome back to my channel, Our Country-ish Acre. If you're new tuning in, my name is Rachel, and I'm a gardener that lives in Western Pennsylvania. For reference, we are in growing zone 6A here. Now, this evening, I am down here in my seed starting room, which is just my basement, but I am going to be checking on how everything is doing. As you can see behind me, my seed starting rack is really starting to fill up. There's a lot of green. It's really making me happy because outside it is still bitter cold for us. Last weekend we got a massive snowstorm. We got about 13.5 to 14 inches of snow here at our house, and the last week the temperatures have been very cold, which is unusual for us here. The how cold it has been getting. The last couple nights we've gotten down to like -10, -11, which is pretty crazy for us because normally our coldest temperatures are usually like -5. But anyway, so I thought I would just kind of take you guys along and show you, just kind of give a quick update on where things are at in my seed starting room, just how everything's looking, and kind of talk about what I'm doing and what you might need to be doing in your space as well. But let's get to it. So I thought I would just kind of walk you through my process that I go through every time I'm checking my seedlings. So I'm usually starting up top and just kind of checking every row, and looking at all the trays just to see what's happening. Things I'm looking for as I'm scanning the rows. How are things growing? Does anything look like it's leaning and I might need to adjust the lights, or are they stretching? I'm also looking, is algae growing? Like, usually I try and scrape it off if I can get to it. So I'm looking for that. I'm also checking to see if any of the cells are dry, because if they are, I definitely need to water. And then I'm looking at anything that I have um, like just germinating. I'm checking to see how much has germinated. Can I remove the humidity dome, and can I take it off the heat mat? So that's kind of my process anytime I'm checking in with my seedlings. But up top, I have my first succession of anemones and ranunculus, and as you can see, they are looking really lovely. I'm really happy and pleased with how they are growing. I do think I might have started them just maybe a week or two early. I think I'm getting nervous with how cold it is outside, because I was planning on booting these out in like mid to end of February, and just with how bitterly cold it's been, that's making me really nervous. So I think I'm gonna have to grow these guys indoors a bit longer than I thought, which, it is what it is, just a learning experience, but we'll see. And then over here, I did start another succession. I purchased some additional ranunculus and anemones, so I started the first succession of those varieties over here. And as you can see, we are just getting some little bits of green on there. So that's exciting, and they're doing really well. And then if you caught my Instagram stories earlier this week, you might have seen that I had a complete gardening fail, which was this. Now, this is one of my winter sowing containers. I had it sitting on the floor, the concrete floor in this room, and I kept like thinking to myself, I have to bring that outside. I have to bring that outside. Like 4 or 5 days went by. I didn't bring it outside. When I finally got around to grabbing it and bringing it, and I was going to bring it outside, I noticed that it sprouted. So I'm not going to bring those outside because these would just be toast at this point. So I brought them in, put them under my grow lights. I'm going to pot these up and continue to grow them indoors. And then I did learn that these are hollyhocks. They are fairly frost, like a light frost tolerant. So I'm planning on just growing them indoors and then probably booting them out, hardening them off and booting them outside around the same time that I'll do my onions. So like late March, early April, and we'll just kind of go for it and see what happens. Experiment. We'll see. For this next shelf, I'm just going to start back here with this tray. This is a tray all of Icelandic poppies. I think I started them about 2-ish weeks ago. This is my first time growing Icelandic poppies, so don't really have high hopes because from what I've heard, they can be pretty finicky to start from seed. They're just very fussy seedlings in general. So again, don't have high hopes, but I do see that I have a pretty good amount germinating here. They look nice and moist, so I'm not going to mess with watering them. We'll just kind of let them be until next time I go to check. Moving on to this tray, these are baby eucalyptus and lavender that I started from seed. They're looking a little bit dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my watering can, and then this is how I bottom water. Just lift it up, and then I add probably about anywhere between 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch of water. And then that's it. I know a lot of people will take a tray, an empty tray, fill it with water, and then move all of these individual cell packs into it, let it soak for like 15-20 minutes, and then move them back to the original tray. That works perfectly fine. I just don't like the fuss of that, so I prefer to just water directly in the tray itself. If you do that, you do need to make sure that you're not adding a ton of water, because if the soil doesn't soak it up, then it's just going to sit there and be stagnant and get yucky, and then your seedlings are not going to be very happy because they don't want to sit in super moist soil. So just something to note there. And then moving on to this next tray, these are all of my Lisianthus, and I can see that they are looking pretty dry. So what I have been doing with my Lisianthus is I have been both bottom watering. So I'm going to do that now. Again, maybe like 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch of water, because I don't want them to be too wet. And then with the Lisianthus too, I've been taking my spray bottle and then just misting the tops. And the reason I'm doing this is because Lisianthus really do not like to dry out. It might be overkill to both bottom water and mist the top, but so far it seems to be working pretty well. So I'm going to keep at it. Okay, those all look really nice now. And then this next tray right here, this is just overflow of my Lisianthus. Again, these are all looking, for this being my first time growing Lisianthus, I'm really happy with how it's turning out, because again, they also have a reputation of being really fiddly, and so far things are looking really good. Some of these cells didn't germinate, but honestly, I oversowed them anyway, so I might end up with more seedlings than I actually have space for as it is, which is a good thing in my opinion. It's better to have more seedlings than not enough. All right, so this one looks good, so we're just going to do a little bit of a shuffle here, because this next tray, these are all of my petunias. They are looking really nice. And a lot of them already have their second set of leaves. Some of them do have the third set of leaves. So what that's telling me is that they are ready for their first round of fertilizer. So I will walk you through how I do my fertilizer. If you give me just a minute, I will grab it and show you. when it comes to fertilizing your seedlings, you don't want to use something that has a very high NPK. You want something that is very low, like a 111. Um, the that gives your seedlings the best chance of not being burned by having too much of any one of those, nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. So what I choose to use for all my seedlings is seaweed fertilizer, and it is quite stinky. It is from the ocean, but I buy packets on Amazon of a dry mix, and then I take an old milk jug. I dump the packet in there, and then you just fill it up with water. And then you kind of shake it up every time you use it. But anytime I go to fertilize my seedlings, which is usually every other week, I'm giving them a little low dose of some fertilizer just to kind of boost, give them some nutrients and stuff as they're growing. But anytime I go to fertilize them, all I'm doing is pouring just maybe a capful or two of this. I don't actually measure it. I just kind of, put a splash in there, but I put a splash into my watering can, and then I fill my watering can up with water, and then that is how I fertilize. So I'm going to go and just kind of dump this in here. So I added the seaweed extract to my watering can. I filled my watering can up, and now I'm going to fertilize this tray of petunias because they are dry and they are ready for their first go of food. So it's the same process that I follow for regular watering. I'm just putting probably an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch of water in the bottom. The only difference between this and the other tray that I just watered is that tiny, tiny bit of seaweed extract in here. And then moving on, these last two trays, these are baby seedlings that were sown, I think, last week. I chose to do these one in soil blocks because they are mini, tiny, tiny seeds, and then I didn't want to risk having a whole bunch of empty cells that didn't germinate. So for tiny seedlings, I like to do them in the soil blocks. And then once they get a little bit bigger, then I'll actually take the little block and then transplant it into a bigger cell block to grow on. But these are looking really good germination wise. They are still pretty wet, the blocks are, so I'm not going to fuss with watering them. And then we will move on to the next row. So for this next row, there's not too much happening on it. This is a tray of pansies that I sowed. The date on them is January 8th. I think these ones were sown at a different, maybe a couple days later, but I didn't write the date on them. Anyway, they're looking really good. And I noticed the other day that they have roots happening. So what that is telling me is that these guys are going to need to be potted up soon. So whenever I see roots coming out at the bottom, if they're just a couple, I don't pot them up immediately. But let's see, like this one's got a lot of root growth. Let's see. I don't know if you can see all that. But that tells me that they're, one, really happy and growing, which is good, but it also means that it might be time for me to pot them up into the next size pot that I have, which are those 2.5-inch pots. So we might be potting those up pretty soon. Yeah, I think I'm going to let them grow a little bit longer in this tray before I pot them up. But when we get there, if that's something you're interested in seeing, let me know and I can do a video on it. If not, I'll just do it off camera. And then this next bin under the humidity dome, these are a bunch of herb seeds I sowed last weekend. I only have a little bit of germination on this cell, so I'm going to keep the humidity dome on. The soil itself in here too looks moist, so I'm not going to bother with it. If it looked dry, I'd either bottom water or miss the top, but it's good now still. So that is good. So this last tray I have in front of me is my onion seedlings. They're on the bottom shelf of my seed sorting rack, but as you can tell, they've put on a really nice amount of growth since I sowed them a couple weeks ago, and they are at that point that I am thinking about trimming them. So when they get usually like about 4 inches tall, I will come through and just trim all of them back a little bit. I like to leave just over 50% of the plant there. I don't want to trim any more than that. You definitely don't want to trim any more, like take off more than 50% of the plant, but I'll just come through and trim them up and then give them a little haircut. And the reason I do that is because it tells the plant to focus more on root and bulb development instead of putting on green growth. So it results in a stockier seedling. And then when I go to transplant them out, I've noticed that for the ones that I trim, they actually look like they're forming a tiny little bulb at the bottom of that, and they're just overall, they look a lot better than the ones that I don't trim. So now I just trim all of them going forward. But when I did a little experiment several years ago, I found that it does make a good difference in there. But like I said, I'm just going to come through and trim these, and then the scraps are actually, they're onions, so they're edible. You can eat them. They make a really nice little garnish. You could throw them in like a stir fry or soup if you wanted. You certainly don't have to use them and eat them if you don't want to, but waste not, want not. So definitely recommend that. And then these are not looking really dry. They're nice and moist, so I won't worry about watering them, but I'll just, like I said, come through and give them a nice little haircut, and then they'll be good to grow. And then anytime they get about 4-ish inches tall, I'll give them another haircut. Usually ends up being 2 to 3 haircuts by the time they actually get booted outside. So you don't want to keep constantly giving them, trimming them here and here and here. I let them grow a little bit and then trim them back, let them grow a little bit and trim them back. But that's my process. I hope you enjoyed this little seedling check-in. As I mentioned, I kind of do that same process every time I check my seedlings, which is at least once a day, sometimes twice a day, but I'm just looking at each tray just to kind of note what's going on, and if it needs watered, I will give it some water or fertilizer depending on where it's at in that stage. And then I will also look to see if I need to pot up anything, and then that kind of gives me an idea of what I have to do, like on my next to-do list. But I do thank you for joining me today, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.